Hello and welcome to this video about the American Revolution. The American Revolution was a pivotal moment in the history of the United States. It was a time of great change and upheaval, as the colonies fought for their independence from Great Britain. The roots of the revolution can be traced back to the early 1700s, when the colonies began to grow and prosper. The colonies were established by various European powers, including the British, the French, and the Spanish. As they prospered, the colonies began to develop their own distinct cultures and societies. However, the colonies were not entirely autonomous. They were still subject to the rule of the European powers that had established them, and in the case of the British colonies, this meant that they were governed by the British monarchy and Parliament. As the colonies grew and prospered, they also began to resent the heavy-handed rule of the British government. The colonists chafed under the many taxes and regulations that were imposed on them, and they began to demand more control over their own affairs. One of the major points of contention between the colonies and Britain was the issue of taxation. The British government believed that it had the right to tax the colonies in order to help pay for the costs of defending and governing them. The colonists, however, saw these taxes as unfair, as they did not have any representation in the British Parliament and therefore had no say in how they were governed. The turning point came in 1773, when the British passed the Tea Act, which imposed a tax on tea imported to the colonies. The colonists, led by a group known as the Sons of Liberty, staged the famous Boston Tea Party, in which they protested the tax by throwing crates of tea into the harbor. This act of defiance sparked the beginning of the Revolutionary War. The colonists formed the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, and began to fight for their independence. The war lasted for 8 long years, and it was a difficult and brutal struggle. The British had a much larger and better trained army, and they were aided by the Loyalists, colonists who remained loyal to the British Crown. The Continental Army, on the other hand, was made up of volunteer soldiers who were often poorly equipped and trained. Despite these challenges, the Continental Army was able to score some significant victories, thanks in part to the help of the French, who joined the war on the side of the colonists. The war also saw the adoption of guerrilla tactics by the Continental Army, which allowed them to outmaneuver and defeat the larger British forces. In the end, the colonists emerged victorious, and on July 4, 1776, they declared their independence from Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson and adopted by the Continental Congress, outlined the colonists' grievances against the British monarchy and set forth the principles of liberty and democracy upon which the new nation would be founded. The American Revolution was a turning point in history, not just for the United States, but for the world. It was a war fought for the principles of liberty and democracy, and it inspired other countries to follow suit and fight for their own freedom. The ideals of the revolution continue to be celebrated and upheld today, and they remain an important part of the American national identity. Thank you for watching this video about the American Revolution. We hope you learned something new and gained a greater appreciation for this important moment in history.